allow me to present Dr. David Agus, who is a good friend of the Israeli Presidential Conference, and some of you may have had the pleasure of hearing him speak at last year's conference. Dr. Agus is professor of medicine and engineering at the University of Southern California and heads their West Side Cancer Center and their Center for Applied Molecular Medicine. He's a staunch advocate for personalized medicine and is co-founder of 2 healthcare technology and wellness companies. Since he is a part of the conference family, it seems appropriate to quote another conference speaker, Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, who says the following about Dr. Agus. Dr. David Agus has been disrupting medicine, as we know, for his entire career. Now he brings his ideas out of the lab and exam room and into the lives of everyone, showing us how to live long, healthy, disease-free lives. Reading this book is the best thing you can do for yourself and your loved ones. The book he is referring to is Dr. Agus's latest bestseller, The End of Illness, whose title is the topic of his lecture today and is also in print in Hebrew. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Jerusalem welcome to Dr. David Agus. Thank you.
Thank you. It's certainly an honor to be here. It is sort of humorous to be at the President's Conference, and when they put a quote from the book, they use Mark Benioff's quote, when the Hebrew edition, which came out 2 weeks ago, had a quote from Shimon Peres on the back. Shimon said that when the mirror came out, the world changed. We care what we looked like. We care how we interacted. Everything changed with the mirror. The technology described in the book is that new mirror. And I'm going to show you some of that today. So I wrote a book, and about a year and a half ago, I sent it to the publisher. About a week later, the publisher called me back and said, Agus, Steve Jobs just called and changed the title of your book. I'm like, he did what? And he said he changed the title. I had originally called the book, What is Health? Because to me, it was the key question. How do you optimize on something when you don't have a parameter upon which to optimize? There's no marker for health. Is it how you look? Is it how you feel? Is it your cholesterol? Is it how long you live? What really is health? So I called up Steve, and I said, Steve, what did you do? He goes, David, you can't put the word health in the title. It turns people off. It's a bad word. As soon as you say health, people's eyes roll back. They kind of glaze over. Plus, he said, you can't gift a book with the word health to somebody else because it implies they're in bad health. Last year on Amazon.com, it was the second most gifted book on all of Amazon. So Steve was right. And I asked Steve, I said, why would you call the publisher and not me? He goes, Agus, it's their job to market the book, not yours. I said, all right. So when I wrote the book, I sent it to a bunch of friends, and one of them, a New York Times columnist, called me up and said, Agus, I like the book, but why do you have the right to write the book? And I thought about it for a while, and this was the answer. If you wish for peace, understand war. Is that I'm a cancer doctor. 2 to 3 times a week, I look at someone in the eye and say, I have no more drugs to treat your cancer. I don't want to do that anymore. And so when you go to the edge of a cliff on cancer and you really push the human condition with the drugs and the therapies we do, you learn a lot. And that knowledge allows us to go back and model general health, as I'm going to show you, in a very different way. And this is what Steve was alluding to, right? Is that Mark Twain had this great quote where he said, the only way you keep your health is eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd rather not. Well, I will tell you that's not the case, as I'll show you. So the key thing is, what is your metric? In the United States, last year, we spent $1.51 billion on growth hormone in people in non-short stature. If I take a 70-year-old and inject them with growth hormone, they come back a month later, their friends are going to say, you look fantastic. What happened to you? You lost weight. You look more fit. You look great. And it's true. It makes you look better and probably feel better. It makes you live, on average, 12 years shorter, but you look better. So the question is, what is your metric? Where is your value system? Do you want to play with your grandkids and roll in the grass, or do you want to look good today? And so it's always important when we talk about health is that what are you optimizing on? And we'll show you there's some very simple things I think we can do it. But obviously our goal is to be like President Peres and to live until our 90s, our 100s, or 120, however long he's able to continue doing what he does so magically. The way we do that is we prevent disease. The way we do that is we don't get the diseases. Because I will tell you, we're not very good at treating them. But we have the technology to actually prevent them. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times last year that was the second most downloaded article of the year. About a pill that was 2,433 years old, this pill. This pill, if you take it every day, you reduce the incidence, not the incidence, but the death rate of cancer by 37%. You reduce heart disease by 22% and stroke by 17%. This pill costs $3 a year. It's called a baby aspirin. And I argue we all have a right to do whatever we want in health, but at some point, what is the right thing to do? This baby aspirin is a remarkable pill. The data are on over 600,000 people, randomized studies over 25 years, costing hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet most people don't do it. And we'll show you some of that data. Very simple things one can do to have a profound effect on health. The paradox is, you make people live longer, healthcare costs go down. So 83 is the last year, 83 years old is the magic age in our country, in the United States, where you can do something which the last year you're allowed to do it was 1953, which is die of old age. Ever since 1953, you have to die of a cause. Well, when you're 83 years old and older, we don't put you on a ventilator anymore. We don't put you in an intensive care unit. We don't do these crazy heroic things that cost tremendous amounts of dollars and pain to you, yet in general have no benefit. So the paradox is, if you live longer, it's actually going to cost less to you and also to society. So the general premise I have is that we made a major mistake in medicine in the 1920s. This mistake came from one simple experiment. We took 6 people in each arm, so 12 people total. 6 of them, they all had cuts on their legs. 6 of them, we took bread, we dipped it in water, and we wrapped it around their leg. And 6 of it, we left open to the air. The people who had the bread on their leg healed twice as fast. And it spawned something called germ theory. Why? The moist bread got mold, which made penicillin, and the wounds healed. And this concept of germ theory said the following. You identify what you're up against, you know how to fix it and cure it. So if you look under the microscope and see the bacteria, you know what antibiotic to give. And it was right. The problem is every other human disease, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, they don't follow that rule of germ theory. Once you identify what you're up against, you don't know how to treat it. Those diseases are from within. Bacteria are from without. Those diseases are your body intersecting with itself. And so you need to change the system, not just target the disease. And that's a radically different way of thinking about medicine. Because we say, listen, if you have cancer, let's sequence the cancer cell, look at the DNA, then we're going to know how to treat it. And I was one of the chairs of the Cancer Genome Project, and I will tell you, we got it wrong. When I was taking care of Steve, he called it jumping lily pad to lily pad. As that every time his cancer progressed, he was swimming in the pond. Once we identified a target, he was safe on a lily pad. Yet, we only bought him months of life. And so, the average cancer, for example, in diagnosis, has over 500 mutations. You can't target them all. You can't model them. Yet we need to figure out a better way to treat disease. Somebody is telling me to check online. There we go. So this is a wild slide, right? And it's depressing at the same time. Heart disease, dramatic influence on death rate. Why? 2 reasons. This is 1950 to 2007, the last year we had data. Reason number 1 is we're smoking less, right? Dramatic increase in smoking. Although walking through the streets of Israel, there is some smoking going on here. In the United States now, 19% of kids in high school still smoke. 19%. Yet we have a dramatic decrease in smoking, and we also have the advent of this class of drugs called statins. And we'll talk about them in a minute, but they're the Lipitors, the Crestors of the world. They were developed to lower cholesterol, which they do, but it turns out they do something else. And their true mechanism is not lowering cholesterol, it's blocking inflammation. Baby aspirin a day blocks inflammation. These statins block inflammation. You see a theme coming through here, and that is inflammation seems to be the root of heart disease, cancer, etc. Well, stroke down dramatically, same reasons. Pneumonia, influenza, we've got vaccines, we've got great antibacterials and antivirals, yet cancer, almost no change in over 50 years. Why? Because we're treating it like germ theory. We're treating it like a bacteria. We're targeting the cancer cell. We're not targeting the system. I want to tell you a story now that may offend some of you, and I apologize in advance. And it will offend you because of the cast of characters. But in 1997, I was a trainee at Sloan Kettering, and a 25-year-old kid came in the room. He had germ cell tumor in the brain, the lung, and the liver, and the doctors looked him in the eye and said, listen, you got a bad cancer. This kind of cancer doesn't respond to chemotherapy. You're the son of a single mother. Go home and spend your last few months with her because family what counts. Well, this kid, this is before the internet where you can Google things, but this kid went to Indianapolis and got platinum. The same thing in my wedding band intravenously. Why? Because some doctor put 2 platinum electrodes in a gel and said, do cancer cells like electricity or not? And the cancer cell didn't care about the electricity and the electrodes, but some of the platinum leached off and killed some of the cells, so they gave it intravenously. A year and a half later, he won his first of 7 now contested Tours de France. So Lance and I were on stage 2 years ago at a TED conference, and this is before the whole controversy. And by the way, I was shocked by the whole thing. And he said, Agus, how did platinum work? And I looked him in the eye and said, I have no idea. Somehow platinum changed Lance so the cancer didn't want to grow. Platinum changed Lance so the cancer didn't want to grow. And that's an important theme that we're going to get back to. To me, these diseases, cancer, heart disease, they're verbs, not nouns. You're cancering, you're heart diseasing. So my job is not to shrink your cancer, but it's to change you from a cancer state to a health state. And I'll show you some of the ways we can start to think about it. But think of it this way. You've got inputs to your body. That's your DNA. It's what you eat. It's who you live with. It's who you married. And the output's how you feel. Well, that middle state function has been hidden throughout history. And for the first time now through technology, we can actually see it. Remember, there's a conversation happening in your body. We just have never listened to it. And now we can. And I'll show you what it's saying in a couple of examples. But the bad news is that this complex emergent system, which is you and I, it is almost impossible to understand. And by definition, it is, right? There are dimensions to us that we're learning all the time. We just figured out about the microbiome, the bacteria in our body, for the first time ever. We sequenced them a couple months ago. We thought junk DNA was junk, which is 80% of our genome, but it turns out it doesn't. It regulates other DNA. And we're learning these things every quarter, so almost by definition, we can't understand it, yet we can control it. If I ask my son, how do you stop a train? He doesn't say, what's the temperature, the track speed, what's the humidity? He says, you pull the brake. I want to go back to thinking like that in cancer. Remember, that climate modeler doesn't go up 10,000 feet and measure the wind and the temperature. They look at the shape of the cloud, and it tells them what's going on. So we need to think more like climate modelers, as I'll show you. But remember, take what I say somewhat with a grain of salt, because I am the same profession that said this, and this, and this, and this. I love this. Lady with a lamp. I am the same profession that pushed all of these. And yet at the same time, 28 years ago, we told people, we want you to have margarine, not butter. And look at the epidemiologic data. We killed 2.3 million people by making those statements. So let's go back to the data. And I'm going to take a couple of things in your life that are very simple, and let's start to examine them. Let's start to look at the data and see if we can understand it a little better. So what is exercise? If I ask you, what do you do for exercise? Most people say, I went to the gym for an hour a day. I go jogging for 20 minutes a day. I put my tape in and do my calisthenics, or whatever you do. But let's look at the data. And the data are going to show that I love that hour at the day at the gym. But if you then sit for 5 hours during the day, it's equivalent on a health basis to smoking a pack and a quarter of cigarettes. Sitting for 5 hours a day is the same on a health basis as smoking a pack and a quarter of cigarettes. Wow. Yet we've designed our society so we're sitting. In 1953, in the British Transit Authority, there were 26,000 workers. Half were the bus drivers that sat 90% of the day, and half were the ticket takers that walked around and took the tickets on the bus. They weighed the same body mass index, smoked the same, lived in the same environment, and married people of similar socioeconomic background. Yet there was 70% less heart disease and 40% less cancer in the ticket takers. We've become a society of bus drivers. The more important you are, the closer your parking space is to your office. The richer you are, the more bathrooms you have in your house. You don't even have to walk room to room. Our bodies were designed to move. Our lymphatics in our body, which control our immune system and our homeostasis, have no muscle in their wall. In fact, it's the rhythmic contractions of the muscles in your legs when you walk that actually make your body work. Yet we've engineered our society for the opposite. We have buildings all over EU, Israel, and America that are rated for the environment. Why aren't we rating buildings for health? I went to one of the big Fortune 500 companies, and they said, what can we do simply that can change the health of our employees? And I said, I want you to make your elevator coin-operated. Every time someone gets in your elevator, it's costing you money because they increase their risk of disease. Remember, one case of colon cancer to a company costs $105,000, let alone the cost to their family, society, etc. One heart attack is $82,000. So if they can do some preventive strategies, getting people to move. You know, when we came out with the book and all this data, Nike made this device. And so it looks at how much I move during the day. And it gives me these units called Nike Fuel. And it's movement over time. And it communicates to your phone. You start to compete. And so I get home at the end of the day. I'm below my wife. I'll go walk for an hour with the dog. So I can beat her and go to bed number one. I have a phone now. So in my office, when I talk on the phone, it's wireless. And it goes, I'm looking at air traffic controller. But I can walk around the office and talk on the phone. I actually have a treadmill desk. So 2 hours a day, I do emails. I'm walking at a very slow speed. And the dramatic effect on health is wild there, yet we don't think like that. This is the coolest other graph from that same paper. They looked at profession and rate of death. And so the best was coal miners and gardeners. Coal miners, because they're walking all the time. The worst were hairdressers and secretaries, because they're either sitting or standing the whole time. So a very simple thing we can do, and we can re-engineer our society to bring health. So switching gears now, 1974, Monsanto publishes in their annual report, to sequence a gene will cost $150 million for one gene. When I launched the book, I did 5 nightlines in a row. The first nightline, Bill Weir, the 41-year-old, thin, healthy nightline anchor, came in, 2 young kids. Live on TV, I sequenced his gene. To sequence one gene cost me about $1.50 in my lab today. So I sequenced his genes, and I showed that he was high risk of heart disease. So live on TV, based on that, I put him in a heart scanner, and we showed an 80% blockage of the big artery in his heart. He called it the story that saved his life. The next morning, the American Heart Association and others said, Agus didn't do the right thing because Weir didn't fit our criteria for screening. And I said, are you serious? He was positive. Your criteria are wrong. They said if everybody had a heart scan in our country, which, by the way, cost $79, then there would be chaos. And I said, you should be lobbying. This is on Charlie Rose. I said, you should be lobbying Congress for better technology, more scalable technology, cheaper technology, technology that doesn't use radiation like a CAT scan does, because we need to start to prevent disease. And that's the only way we're going to make an impact on health. You know, it's astonishing that in the United States, 31% of our economy is health and food. In Israel, that number is 25%. Yet if you look at the recent elections, nobody talked about health and food. They talk about health care finance, which I don't care about, but I care about health care. If we want to make a change, we have to start to change and think differently and talk differently. Well, this is me. You know, I founded a company where you spit into a tube, we sequence your DNA, and for $99, we could tell you 40 diseases and your likelihood of getting them in your lifetime. Well, they're not deterministic, and they're not going to happen, but they will tell you what could happen and the likelihood, and you can make individual changes. In the next session of the plenary talk, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and what the future of these technologies is, and also the Supreme Court decision that happened last week in the United States. The good is you can't blame your parents for everything. Is that half is environment and half is genetics. You control your environment. And so knowing what you're up against allows you to start to change your life for prevention. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's go back. Aspirin we talked about before. Dramatic study, hundreds of millions of dollars showing it worked. Yet only 11% of people over the age of 40, which is where the studies were done, actually take a baby aspirin a day. Profound in that regard. Statins, like I told you about, the Lipitor, the Crestors of the world, they took people with normal cholesterol and they put them on a statin. They lowered, delayed heart attack by close to 12 to 13 years with a normal cholesterol by blocking inflammation. Reduced cancer incidence by 30%. So these 2 pills, and I'm not telling anybody to take a pill. What I'm saying is I want the conversations to happen with your doctor. Very few things in medicine are black and white. You have to use caution with this term today, but it's shades of gray. So there's no right thing to do. It's what's right for you and your value system. So I want you to go in with the data and say, why aren't I on an aspirin? And have that conversation. Go in with your data. How many people go to the doctor and they check your blood pressure? Your blood pressure's a little high, let me put you on a pill. Well, that's 2 o'clock. Whoever checked your blood pressure at 8 a.m. when you get up? Or at 6 o'clock when you sit down to dinner? Or at 9 o'clock when you go to bed? There's an old adage, with enough data, error goes away. I want you to have your data. I want you to be in charge. Yet we don't really do that in healthcare in our countries. So let's change gears once again and talk about a very simple thing called vitamins. So there were 39,000 women tracked over close to 2 decades. Now it's 21 years. And they looked at women who took vitamins versus not. And the interesting thing was 15% higher death rate in the women who took vitamins. And by the way, death is a bad side effect. And so that just makes you scratch your head a little. It wasn't a placebo-controlled randomized study. It was an observational study, but interesting. And so let's start to look at some of the data. Take them one at a time for a minute. Vitamin D. These are headlines that I pulled over the last 6 months on vitamin D. According to the headlines, it does everything. In fact, with vitamin D and calcium and vitamin D, 83% of women over the age of 65 in our country take vitamin D. Yet, when I gave this as a TED Talk and showed the data, the FDA commissioner was astounded at what I'm going to show you. And about 4 months ago, on the front page of the New York Times, the government changed their recommendation and said nobody in the United States should take supplemental calcium or vitamin D. And I'll show you why. And so these are the data. So the first is, what does it mean to be low in vitamin D? Well, 97% of African Americans and 75% of Caucasians are low in vitamin D. So first of all, who defined what normal was? I don't know about you, but I didn't come with an instruction manual. And so when you measure one node of a network, that is, you're measuring vitamin D, not the sensor molecule called a receptor, or the signaling molecules, what does that really mean? Because remember, we all developed a very exquisite means to block too much vitamin D. It's called tanning. The reason we tan is to block vitamin D absorption. So the body doesn't like too much of it. Yet look at the data here. What the data show, 2,200 women over the age of 70 given a dose of vitamin D to raise their level for a year. When they did that, their rate of bone fracture increased 26%. It didn't decrease, it went up. Vitamin D increased the rate of bone fracture. It screwed up that network so that the bone wasn't normal anymore. They increased the rate of bone fracture. Kind of wild in that regard. There was then a study done with 25,000 women in the Women Health Study, and these were younger women randomized to calcium and vitamin D or placebo. Lots of side effects from the calcium and vitamin D, kidney stones, upset stomach, and other things, yet it didn't affect bone fracture rate at all. So the question is, why are we taking it? In the United States, we spend 2.5-fold more on vitamins and supplements than we do in all of medical research. Astonishing. So the government went ahead and spent $250 million on a study in 35,000 men, randomizing to vitamin E or placebo to prevent prostate cancer, because that's the most common supplement men were taking, either a multivitamin or separate. And what it showed after 3 years was a 17% increase in prostate cancer. They had to halt the study, and that increase lasted for 3 years after stopping the vitamin E. And yet still, a significant number of men take this. And the amazing thing is, if you take vitamin E and you develop prostate cancer in Israel, in the United States, who pays for the treatment of your cancer? The government does. We all do through our taxes. So we allow people to do this, and then we pay for the ramifications of their behavior. So 63 randomized studies done in the history of mankind with vitamins. None have ever shown a benefit in the history of mankind. And they represent close to $3 billion in funding for these studies. So the naysayers say, listen, Agus, disease happens once in a while in patients. So in order to get really statistical, you need a really high prevalent disease. So look at smokers or former smokers. So it was done. 18,000 smokers or smokers or former smokers. Given high-dose antioxidants, beta-carotene or vitamin A. The study showed a 28% higher lung cancer rate and 17% higher death rate in the people who took the supplements. So the question is, why are we doing it? Why are we allowing these things to happen? Change gear again. 1976, if you, your spouse, your friend thought they were pregnant, We took a tube of blood, and this test could only be done in a hospital. We injected a rabbit. 5 days later, we sacrificed the rabbit. If the rabbit's ovaries were enlarged, you were pregnant. That was the state of the art in 1976. 1977, along comes Werner Schulket with a $9 test. And they radically changed maternal health, fetal health. And rabbits of the world rejoice, by the way. But this test was the first proteomic test looking at a protein. So for the first time, we can actually look what's going on in the body. Remember, if you're in front of 2 Chinese restaurants and look at the ingredient list, they're exactly the same. You taste the food, one is great and one is bad. Well, DNA is your ingredient list. Protein is what's going on a moment in time. We now have the ability of looking at the conversation in the body, and this is it. So this is a drop of blood that went through a superconducting magnet, and we got a picture of all the proteins in the body. This is the conversation that's happening, and we're able to look at it. And so in the future, what medicine will be is saying, listen, what's happening in you? I hate one size fits all. I hate saying people should take an aspirin. People should take a statin. People should do this and that. I want to say, based on your family history, this could happen soon, and I'm going to look and say, it will happen, so let's intervene. That's how medicine has to go, and it will go, as I'll show you. So changing gears once again is that you have 10-fold more bacteria in your body than you do cells in the body. In fact, there's 20-fold more bacterial DNA in your body than there is human DNA in your body. Well, these bacteria, they control your metabolism, your hormone level, your risk for many disease. In fact, the risk for breast and prostate cancer in China is 1/10 of ours. After someone from China moves to the EU, to Israel, to the United States, their risk starts to approach ours after 10 years. And we always said, is the McDonald's and Burger King? It turns out it's not. They adopt our microbiome. And so these bacteria, for the first time ever, we sequenced them and we looked at them over the last 6 months. And I guarantee you going forward, we're going to start to change them based on your risk of disease. And it will be intriguing. Turns out that somebody who's obese versus somebody who's skinny has different dominant bacteria in their GI tract. So obesity, part of it may also just be that you have different organisms living inside you. And we're going to be able to change that going forward. Well, I want to end on something a little bit different. And I want to tell you just some very simple data that you could do in your own life to make a difference. So they took 600 parents and they said, have your kids go to bed whenever they want. Wake them up 10.5 hours later. Here's a stopwatch. They said to the other 600 parents, have your kids go to bed exactly the same time every night and wake up in 10.5 hours. So the same amount of sleep in both arms, 26% improvement in cognition when they went to bed the same time and got up the same time. That's good to great right there. You have your lunch today at noon, tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Insulin, cortisol, stress hormones in the body goes up. Metabolism goes down. You actually gain weight. Your body gets stressed, doesn't know when its next meal is, so cognition goes down, exercise performance goes down. So if you have your meals the same time every day, nothing in between, no grazing as we call it, then you can actually dramatically reduce inflammation and disease. People who eat whenever they're hungry have 80% more diabetes, and that's a weight-adjusted fact. And so one of the things based on the book in China they're doing is they're actually having bells for mealtime at workplaces. And they're not allowed to serve snacks in between. In Israel, the better the company is, the more snacks they have out so people can grab the snack in between while they're working, never have to leave their desk. We need to change that if we want to truly affect disease. And these are rather simple ways to do it. So what I've told you today are some very simple things. And the book goes into much more detail on these and many others. But I want you to question. Each of us are in charge of our own health. Healthcare is going to change not from the top down. Doctors, myself, we are stubborn folk that are pig-headed. Medicine, healthcare will change from the bottom up. It will change by you going to your doctor, asking the questions, and pushing for the answers, and having the talk about what's right for you as an individual. And technology is going to make it better. You know, Malcolm Gladwell wrote an amazing book called Blink, where he put 10 Rembrandt experts in a room and put 10 paintings on the wall, 9 of which were real and 1 was fake. They would go and they would say, real, real, fake, real, and they got it right. He would then say to them, well, why is this one fake and this one real? And they had no idea. They'd seen enough of them over the years that they didn't even know how the brain was processing it, but they could tell it was fake and real. Well, that's what medicine is. It's an art today. The hope is through technology and some of the things we'll talk about in the future session that's coming up, through technology, we're going to make it a science. And that's where we're going to have this dramatic effect for all of us, both for treating disease and also preventing. So with that, I thank you very much for listening.